do the I pledge allegiance to the United States,
United States of America, and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do the invocation.
Dear Lord, we come today to bow our heads and open this meeting in prayer. Thank you for the opportunities you give us to serve you and to serve others. We ask for your blessings on this meeting. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Let's go ahead and call the order for the workshop. And that's item number 1 is a presentation of CM Associates related to the traffic forecasting uncertainty for investment grade traffic and revenue study for the 365 project.
Yes, sir. Chairman and directors, we have Carlos Contreras and Axel Harmon with CNM Associates, and they will be providing you with a presentation related to the traffic forecasting for the investment grade traffic and revenue study for the 365 tollway project. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlos.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. Let me see why I have a echo. Do you guys have an echo when I talk?
No, sir. I'm fine.
All right. So let me share my screen. Very well. Hopefully everybody's watching my screen.
Yes.
Very well. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. What I will be presenting is a framework that we are using to address the uncertainty for traffic forecasts generated by the current pandemic. So this first slide shows the few maps of the United States. If you look at the one on the left, that's where the suppression started through lockdown. Pretty much the whole country was under lockdown. That's at the beginning of March, are the and then the one in the right is the situation that we're living right now, where some states have lockdown pauses. That includes Florida and Texas, as well as California, that have now closed bars and have seen a spike in recent cases. This slide shows the labor market slack, basically created by increase in unemployment claims. So you can see in dark blue the unemployment gap. The light blue is the participation gap. That's basically the workers that have stopped participating in the labor pool, basically stop looking for a job or employment. So Goldman Sachs predicts that the current market slack is going to remain through late 2021. And as you can see on the right, after the where the Goldman Sachs forecast starts, they see a sharp decline on employment, and then that continuing throughout the end of 2021. This graph was created at the beginning of May, but it's largely still valid, although the levels will shift regarding the response that the employment sector or the labor market reacts to the stimulus from the US government and local governments. This next slide is a matrix of potential scenarios. CNM is looking at the scenarios that have been developed by different entities that includes McKinsey and the rating agencies. So we're looking at scenarios developed by Moody's, Filch, Standard & Poor's. This one from McKinsey we have found very helpful to frame the discussion and the preparation of our analysis. You have on the y-axis the health response to the situation. So at the top, you have the rapid and effective control of the virus spread. And at the bottom, a broad failure of public and health interventions. Then on the x-axis, across the graph, you see the economic response to the pandemic. On the left, you have an ineffective intervention. And on the right, you have a highly effective intervention. So this is a matrix that creates 9 different scenarios, depending on the different responses from a health perspective and from an economic perspective. This next slide shows the evolution of how these 9 scenarios have been perceived by global executives. This is a survey that McKinsey conducts every month, and starting in April. And as you can see at the top left, the A1 scenario, the one that is at the center, so basically a mid response from a health perspective and a mid response from an economic perspective, was the one that had the most votes in the poll of global executives. That was in April. In May, that same scenario increased from 31% to 36%. In June, when the initial response to the pandemic looked promising, the response from the survey moved up to the optimistic scenario in A3. So that's the center column at the top, where the virus is contained and growth returns. So the perception across industry has been varying between the center A1 and the top A3. So this is what we're gonna continue to be looking at as we conduct the analysis for the SH365 project. We have hired independent economists. EPS is the firm that is assisting with us on the development of this study. They have a wealth of experience assisting traffic and revenue forecasts throughout the country. We have worked with them in many studies, and we're very confident on their capabilities. As we speak, they are developing socioeconomic scenarios that roughly corresponds to these scenarios created by McKinsey, but they are landing their forecast on the particular situation of Hidalgo County. So just very briefly, this is information you've seen before. This is the trend in COVID-19 cases per 100,000 people. As of July 4th, the United States has 14.5 cases per 100,000 people. The next slide shows the same information but for different states. These are states where CNM is currently conducting traffic and revenue forecasts. In Virginia, we're right now conducting several investment grade studies. In Colorado, we're working on a couple of studies for the Colorado Department of Transportation. And as you can see in Texas, is above the United States average with 23.2 cases per 100,000 people. Now, digging it further into Texas itself, you see that for a while, Harris County and Dallas were far ahead in terms of number of cases per 100,000 people. Hidalgo County just recently surpassed them in July 4th. We expect that this is not going to be the ongoing situation for the next 6 months. There's going to be variations, but we're going to be keeping an eye on how this develops. This has implications for the economic situation of the country, the state, and the county. This graph shows the OECD, basically the club of most wealthy nations that developed a scenario for the United States. This scenario was developed in July and shows just a couple of scenarios that we find helpful, that shows in the blue line what would the economy recovery would look like with a single hit scenario, and in the red line, a double hit scenario. This is not necessarily what we're assuming, but it just gives you an idea of the type of information that EPS is looking at. And they're gonna develop scenarios for us as an optimistic scenario, a most likely scenario, and a pessimistic scenario that roughly reflect the type of thinking that we showed in the McKinsey scenario. It is also important because of the location of Hidalgo County close to the US-Mexico border, how the Mexican GDP has been behaving. As you can see in this graph, Mexico went into recession way in advance of the actual pandemic. They started the recession in Q3 of 2019, and they're expected to continue into recession just like the United States, but they will probably recover later and have a deeper recession. So the International Monetary Fund expects that for 2020, the Mexican economy is going to decrease 10.5% and will recover in 2021 by 3.3%. The comparable numbers for the United States are a decrease in 2020 of 8% and a recovery of 4.5% in 2021. So the United States will recover faster and sooner. This is a variation of the economic preparedness that Moody's created. Basically, Texas is among the states that are best prepared to undergo a recession. Basically, under their baseline scenario, an 18% decline in general fund revenues could be handled by Texas. The 23% decline in their severe scenario Texas would not be prepared for that. So we expect that there would be probably some contraction of spending or budgets by the Texas government. This is the Texas 2020 tax collections in 2020 compared with 2019. And as you can see overall, there's a decline in 2020 compared to 2019 numbers. Different areas of the economy are hit differently. The ones that are most closely watched by us are the sales taxes and the oil and gas production, because they represent, between both of them, more than 80% of the total tax collections by the state of Texas. Governor Abbott asked in May for most state agencies to calculate a 5% reduction in their budgets. That's not going to be implemented yet, but the governor did ask for those plans in case those are necessary. This is information about traffic at the border. This is the El Paso Ciudad Juarez International Bridges. At the height of the lockdown, there was an 82% decline in pedestrians, and that is expected because only activities that are deemed essential are allowed to cross the border. Personal vehicles had a maximum drop of almost 70%, and that has an improvement of to 31% by the end of May. Cargo trucks had a slower decline, and at the end of this forecast or observed traffic, you saw also around 30%. You see this across all border crossings. So Laredo also shows about 62% decline in April when it was at the height of the lockdown, and 32% decline for commercial vehicles. In general, commercial vehicles see a lower decline than personal vehicles across the border and across the country. The Pharr bridge in April also saw a decline of 35% for commercial vehicles and 50% for passenger vehicles. So with this information, let me describe how we're looking at forecasting traffic in general for all our projects around the country, and specifically for the SH365 investment grade study. In the short term, we're looking at the pandemic and health economic policy response. We continue the forecast work as we had planned. And the good news is that we have traffic information collected from before the pandemic hit. So we're using the expected traffic, both for passenger vehicles and for commercial vehicles, that has been observed under normal circumstances. Of course, we're going to consider the type of vehicle and the trip purpose, the differences. Like one example is the commercial versus passenger vehicle differences that we showed earlier. And we're assuming a V-long or a Nike swoosh shape recovery. In other words, like a V that drops sharply, but then in the recovery, it takes a little bit longer, such like a check mark or a Nike swoosh kind of logo, if you're familiar with the Nike logo, where it drops sharply and then comes back slowly. We're assuming that 2019 levels are going to be recovered by 2023, 2025. So by the time the SH365 facility opens, we're going to be under a normal situation of growth. Now, where that growth starts, that's what EPS is going to help us with. In the medium term, we're obviously going to look at the socioeconomic variables and what is the outlook of the different forecasts that firms like Moody's and Woods and Pools, as well as EPS, will project for the economy. In the case of SH365, mode share and transit is not a big concern, but of course the rating agencies are going to ask if we're looking at those variables, because in general, throughout the country, we're seeing that transit has been declining and there's an increase in use in passenger vehicles. We're going to develop W-shaped, like the ones we showed from the OECD, and rating agency cases as needed to be able to provide a level of comfort to the rating agencies that we are being careful in our assumptions on how the economy will recover. In the long term, there are behavioral changes that need to be taken into account that would adjust temporary and lasting driver attitudes and scenario analysis. This graph shows the type of scenarios that Filch, the rating agencies, is looking at. So you see what are their sensitivity cases when they drop the assumptions in traffic growth, depending on the type of facility. We're showing this in this presentation so that you can look at what the rating agencies are assuming, and that we are considering as we go with eyes wide open into those discussions with them. The last slide shows the Standard & Poor's economic forecast from June 30th. Here again, we see the baseline forecast in yellow, and then the W-shaped recovery that is in the dashed blue line. Just to give you an idea of how Standard & Poor's has changed their assumptions from previous forecasts to their June forecast, we're overlapping here the light blue, and I don't know if you can see that on your screens, but there's a light blue forecast that was their April forecast. So between their April and June forecast, they moved their baseline 1 quarter out in terms of recovery for the economy. So they're looking at recuperating 2019 values by the 4th quarter of 2021. So by the time we open up the SH365 facility to traffic, that blue and yellow lines hopefully will be close to the trend that was forecasted by Standard & Poor's in their Q4 2019 forecast. And with that, we're open to questions.
Board members, you may need to unmute so that you can ask any questions.
So what effects is this going to have long-term for our project?
Well, we are addressing that with our independent economists. So if you remember that last slide where we had how fast the economy recovered, depending on the assessment that they provide us, we will have the starting point for the economy and hence traffic in 2025, and then what the growth rate will be. Right now, our assumption is that by 2025, we're going to be back to normal economic growth. But where do we start before that economic growth takes off? That's what is going to be defined by EPS. So hopefully the effect compared to the forecast that we provided to you before will be minimal. But we cannot say that with certainty until EPS provide us their forecast and we see how the economy develop over the next couple of quarters.
So will that have a direct effect on our ability to go to the marketplace?
I don't think so. We are seeing several bond issuance for toll facilities that have already gone to market over the last couple of months. And the market has been very receptive of these issuances. Particularly, toll roads have a track record of having long-term revenue generating capacity. So investors are looking to save investments, and the market has received those issuances favorably. Now, there are specific circumstances for SH 365 being in the border region and being one of the counties that has been hardest hit by the current pandemic. But the good news is that by the time this facility opens, more than 4.5, maybe 5 years have already passed. So we're probably going to be back to normal growth, and this current pandemic is going to be a distant memory.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
David,
Yes, sir.
does anybody have a concern really on being able to finance this based on the numbers we just heard?
Well, that's kind of that's why I was wondering on the net effect, right? Because our cash flows may have to be cut back by the new projections, and we'll have to look at those.
One of the advantages that we have is that since we gave you our last forecast, which was created with a 2016 base, we've seen significant growth in the county over the last 3 years. So by the time this pandemic hit, we are in a very good position. So even though there's going to be a short-term drop in the economic situation for the county, we expect that starting from that higher base and hopefully having a good recovery over the next 3-4 years will allow us to be in a good position. Of course, the rating agencies will do their regular review of the numbers, but that's why we are paying close attention at what they are looking for so that we can provide them with information that give them a level of comfort.
Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
This is Richard, financial advisor. So I just do want to clarify. I think Director Cantu asked a good question, and one of the things that we're assuming for the financing of SH 365, we are using the numbers that Carlos alluded to for the 2016 study. And based on those numbers, the financing at this point works, and that's assuming that we get the 27 million from TxDOT, and assuming rates stay at least within a range of another 25 basis points. But if the TNR comes back in numbers that are lower than that, we don't have a lot of room. So I think that and I mentioned to Carlos, we need to hear from him early on if it looks like the numbers are coming in that are not as good as what we currently have, then, financing the toll project could be problematic. But I do think like him, though, that is, if that was done in 16 and we've had time for growth and we're really not starting revenue till 25, you would think that those numbers would not be any lower. In fact, it may be the same or higher. So I think we just have to wait and see. But if they do come in lower, it could be an issue.
I agree with the numbers in the future. My concern is, can you get financing now based on what we've got?
Well, the financing will be based on the projected. The financing would be based on projected revenue starting in 25
No,
when the project.
no, I understand that, but it seems like
Yeah.
everything's kind of slowed down, and I don't know how easy it is to get the financing. I don't know that market.
Carlos is correct. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I said Carlos is correct in that we are seeing real positive acceptance of toll financings in the market today. We have several going on this year. Some that have happened. One happened yesterday for, I think it was a TxDOT Mobility Fund, or today. Investors were very eager. And so I think in terms of the sector, if you have a good story, which we would hope that we would have one here, then I think the market has been willing. There's a lot of cash in the market. And the problem is that the rates are so low that investors are really looking for yield. And a project like this would provide a better investment rate than they have typically see. So we would expect that there would be a lot of interest.
Just this is off on a different tangent, because we're so close to the presidential election. Does that have anything to do with the ability to get financing right now or in the near future? Would that impact our process at this time?
The toll revenue, the financing we're going to talk about in a minute is a refunding. It would not impact that. We would be closing before the election. The toll revenue financing would be done several months after. I cannot tell you at this point what the impact would be depending on different outcomes. I think a lot of people have different opinions, so not sure that I can answer that, Director, but it's something that we do think about.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation. Now let's go ahead and go to item number 2, the workshop number 2.
Yes, sir. Chairman, Directors, it's a review of the schedule for the senior lien vehicle registration fee revenue and funding bonds 2020. Again, I'm gonna have Richard Ramirez is gonna go over the schedule for that. So the financing timetable. So Richard, we'll bring it up.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Pilar. Mr. Chairman and Directors, so we sent around a schedule earlier, and I really just want to focus on a couple of key dates that were also included in your summary that was provided to staff last week. And I think each one of you should have a copy of that summary. But so we're expecting a consideration for approval of the resolution that authorizes the refunding and the new money. Today's board meeting. We're planning to go to the rating agencies on July the 30th, either that week or plus or minus a day or so. Hopefully we'll receive ratings before August. We will post on the 18th that we'll post an offering document and have about a period of time from about 10 days, a little bit more, to market the bonds. 2 weeks is probably best for a new bond issue, so we'll have 2 weeks to market, to discuss with investors and tell them about the project. So we hope to price the bonds on September the 10th and then close on the 29th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think the the concern that we all would have is right now the idea behind this refinancing is to basically pay off and save some cash flow and build additional reserves as we move forward, right? So I think, and looking at the rates and looking at what we can do with this refinance up to $10 million, I think it'd be something we really want to consider. Do you agree with that, Richard?
Yes. Yeah. I think the 11 million is in the sweet spot for having additional capacity to pay off the remaining right of way and to do some utility relocations. And then you still have enough room or excess VRF revenue coming in after debt service that it will help support the total revenue financing. So I think that this works pretty well.
Okay. Are there any other questions for workshop item number 2? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn the workshop?
So move.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, is not. Thank you. Let us go ahead and go on to, is there a public comment?
No, sir, we don't have anybody registered for public comment, Chairman.
Okay, can we go into the regular agenda, please?
Yes, sir. Item 1A is Resolution 2020-18, resolution authorizing the issuance of one or more series of Hidalgo County Regional Mobility Authority Senior Lien Vehicle Registration Fee Revenue and Refunding Bonds, Series 2020. Approval and designation of a pricing committee to determine the interest rate, maturity dates, forms of bonds, redemption provisions, and other matters pertaining to such bonds. Approving the projects, prescribing the form, terms, conditions, and resolving other matters incident and related to the issuance, sale, and delivery of the bonds, including the designation and appointment of a syndicate of underwriters, and approval and distribution of an official statement pertaining thereto, authorizing the execution of a paying agent registrar agreement, a purchase agreement, and an escrow agreement, ratifying the pledge agreement and the indenture of trust, ratifying the designation of bond counsel, and approving other agreements related thereto, making other findings and provisions related to the subject matter thereto. Chairman, I'm going to allow, there's an executive summary in your packet. It's labeled agenda item 1A, and I'm going to have Richard go through that executive summary to describe this issuance.
Okay. Again, thank you, Pilar. So the summary talks about the refunding of the Series 2013 bonds, as well as the 11 million of new money. The refunding will just go through the maturity date of the existing bonds, and then the 11 million of new money is a 30-year financing. Right now, we show savings. This is as of last week of $387,000 a year on the refunding. I do expect rates have improved again this week. I do expect that number to be a little higher currently. Again, we talked about the calendar, and so I'm not going to go over that again. We just discussed it a while ago. So the par amount of the deal, this will be 2 series of bonds. It'll be the refunding of the existing bonds and the new money, but it'll be done under one transaction, one offering document, one underwriting syndicate, one whole team. And so the par amount of the bonds is $68,100,000. And then the projected interest cost, and again, this is as of last week, is 2.81%. That'll be fixed throughout the life of the bonds. The projected savings over the life of the bonds is 6.7 million, and then the cost of issuance of 1.4 million. In the sources and uses that follow this page, we break down the cost of issuance so you can see what they are. And so we're recommending a team, a syndicate, a senior manager of Estrada Hinojosa, a co-senior manager of Raymond James, and a co-manager of JP Morgan. If you turn to the second page, is the sources and uses. And again, we have 2 series, so that's where you have the refunding, the 2020 refunding, and then the new money that total is 11, with premium and bonds, it comes out to 11.2 million. So the total par amount of the bonds is 68,100,000. Below you can see what's going into the project fund, the 11 million, what's going for refunding of the bonds, and then the cost of issuance. Currently, you see in the cost of issuance, you see surety, and insurance. Those are kind of the most that we would pay in terms of for the surety and insurance. We're not totally sure that it would be beneficial to have insurance, but if we do, it will drive up the credit rating another notch for the bonds. And this is what we estimate to be the cost. If it's not cost beneficial, we won't have those line items there. And so these expenses they will be actual, whatever they are, but this is a pretty good estimate of where they would be. And then below that, we have the amount that would go to the underwriters, what we call the underwriting spread or the discount that would be to the syndicate. And then to, rounding on our computer models, the 3,900. So in essence, this sources or uses is a pretty good estimate of where I think we would be. And, those rates are subject to change, but we don't really see any upward pressure on the rates. And then the last thing that is a key thing on this summary is that because of the SIB loan and the fact that we have to schedule payments out of the VRF for the existing SIB loan to TxDOT, this financing requires consent from TxDOT. We have sent them all of the information, the plan of finance, and the history on the VRF and so forth. I spoke to one of their finance team members and don't expect to have a problem, according to him, but don't really know until we get their formal approval or consent, I should say. I think I've covered everything here. There is part of the resolution. I think bond counsel is on it, whether you have any questions for myself or for bond counsel. Happy to answer any of those.
Any questions?
Chairman, this is Pilar. We will need the board to designate a pricing committee. So we'd like 3 board members to be on that pricing committee. So when these go to sales, they can make the decision on whether to accept the sale or not.
Can I get a motion for a VRS syndicating committee?
So moved.
And can we get nominations for the members to participate on that committee? I'd like to nominate Forrest, Paul, Moxley, and myself for that committee.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. That takes care of the funding committee, and I think, and we've got an approval for the resolution of the 2020-18 authorizing the issuance. Can I get a motion for that?
So moved.
I got a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second.
That was Zeke. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay. And there being no further business, can I get a motion to adjourn the special call meeting?
So moved, Zeke.
Motion by Zeke. Can I get a second by Paul? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, board.